Hi, so we'll get this journey started. Um, Basically, I'm going to go through a series of strategies and approaches that you should take to the SAT. I'll start off with this one, which would be an introduction, and I will give some general idea of, I think, the best approach to beginning your preparations for the SAT, which I think start with really understanding what the College Board is testing, understanding the different parts of the SAT. Um, and I would say this is probably the more esoteric part of approaching the SAT, in that it's very important. I think it's a part that a lot of times students will go too quickly over. You know, when you see that huge SAT preparation book for the first time and realize that there's no way you're going to go through every single page. And so we skip through those first few chapters. Um, but like anything in life, the more you know about it, the better prepared you'll be, and the better and more confident that you'll feel, and the more confidence that you have, the better you'll do. So let's understand a little bit about the College Board and how they prepare this SAT. It's important to note that this is not really a test for how well you know English and math. It is primarily a test to note how well you know how to take this test. And it's different than many tests I think that you would have taken before in school. It is a multiple choice test, and I think sometimes, especially students coming from a CBSC background or an ISC background, they will often feel a little overconfident when they're taking a multiple choice test, because in your own academic environment, you're always expected to come up with the answer yourself. So it would seem that if they're going to give me the answer, it'll be very easy to identify the right answer. And that's how they get you. They developed this test based on the most common wrong answers that students have given in the past. So let me explain that. When you take the test for the first time, you'll have an official test. You'll have 10 sections. Only 9 of those sections will actually be graded. One of those sections is called an experimental section. And when you're preparing and taking practice tests, you likely won't do the experimental section, because most of the test booklets will only have the 9 sections that would be graded. The experimental section is where the College Board uses new questions that they've made and new optional answers in order to see what are the common errors that students would make. So math is probably the best way that I can illustrate this. When you're doing any math sum, you are working it out on rough paper, and sometimes we'll make small errors along the way. Now, when you're doing the SAT and you make a small error along the way, and then you look at the 5 optional answers and you see that one of the optional answers is the exact sum that you came up with when you made your error, obviously you're going to feel like, well, what are the chances of that the right answer is right there? I must have gotten the right answer. So you confidently mark that circle and color it all in. What you don't know is that when they gave this in an experimental section, last year or sometime before that, they had over 30 optional answers, each student having 5, but different optional answers. And what they did was they analyzed to see what are the most common errors that students make in their working of the math sum, in order to pick the 4 other optional answers besides the right answer. So similarly, this is done in critical reading and in writing. They come up with the most difficult optional answers. And actually, I should say that not all of the optional answers will be difficult. And of course, it's subjective to each student what you find difficult. But it's important to note that the College Board is out there to fool you, and the multiple choice test is made in a way that it will try to tempt you towards the wrong answer. So, one thing to keep in mind. The other thing to keep in mind is that they order these questions from easy, medium, and difficult. Roughly about a third in each section. Third that will be easy difficulty level, and a third medium, and a third hard difficulty level. In most of the sections, and I will tell you which are the exclusions, in most of the sections, they order it in easy first. So if you have, say, 30 questions in a particular section, 10 of the questions will be easier, 10 will be medium, the next 10, and the last 10 would be hard difficulty level. This can be an important strategy to utilize in that once you understand kind of how you are as a SAT test taker, when you're in a medium or a difficult level question, you can start to second guess what you think it might be. For instance, if vocabulary is a challenge for you, and you've realized that over time, even though you're working on it, and you're in a hard difficulty question in one of the sentence completion questions in the critical reading, then you will likely not recognize most of the vocabulary options in the 5 different options that they have. If you do, it's a good chance that that's probably the wrong answer, since you have a difficult time with vocabulary. We'll talk a little bit more about this order of difficulty when we get into analyzing specific questions. But for now, I'll just mention that, and to be aware that, you know, easy questions typically have easier answers, harder questions typically have harder answers. Now let's get into the nuts and bolts. I think right from the start, it's important to note what are the various sections, and what are the various sections going to be testing me on. As I said, there are 10 sections in the test. One of them will be an experimental section. Of the other 9, the very first section in every SAT will be the essay, which is part of the writing section. So there are 3 sections in the SAT. There's a writing section, a critical reading section, and a math section. The writing section will consist of the essay, which is worth about 1/3 of the whole SAT for the writing section. So each section's out of 800. Writing would be out of 800, and the essay would be about 1/3 of the 800 for writing. Then you'll have 2 other sections in writing, but I'll come to those. Well, actually, I'll just explain them. You'll have one section, which is a longer writing section, and that's at 35 questions, and you have to do that in 25 minutes. And then you'll have the very last section of every SAT, section 10, will also be a writing section, and that's a short section of 10 minutes. Okay, so reviewing again, the writing section will have 3 sections overall. Okay, the whole test is going to have 10 sections. One's an experimental section. Within the other 9, we're going to have writing, critical reading, and math. In the writing, the very first section will always be the essay. You'll have one other section, which will be a long section, 35 questions, and in 25 minutes, and that'll be somewhere in the middle. And the last section, section 10, will always be the writing section, and that's just a 10-minute section. Then you'll have 3 math sections. 2 will be 25 minutes, and they'll have 20 questions each. And then 1 will be 20 minutes, and it will have 18 questions. 8 of them will be regular questions, and 10 of them will be grid-in questions. We'll talk a bit more about grid-ins when we get to the math, but grid-in section is where you don't have multiple choice. You come up with the answer, and then you grid in your answer. It's also important to note that the grid-in section does not have negative marking, but every other question, multiple choice question on the SAT test will penalize you for answering a question wrong. This is their way of making sure that there's some penalty for guessing. But we'll talk a bit more about guessing when we get into the strategies. So math, once again, will have two 25-minute sections of 20 sections, 20 minutes, two 25-minute sections of 20 minutes each, and one 20-minute section, which would have 16 questions, okay? One of the regular math sections will be a grid-in, which will have 10 questions that you will come up with the answer on your own and grid in. Coming to the third section of the SAT, we've got the writing and we've got the math. The third section is the critical reading section. The critical reading section is testing your critical thinking skills from a basis of sentence completions, which is mainly testing vocabulary, and then passage-based reading questions, which is testing your ability to recall information or detect information from a passage. Passages will come in different forms, and we'll talk about that more when we get to the critical reading strategies. Critical reading will again have two 25-minute sections and one 20-minute section. The 25-minute sections will have 24 questions in all, and those are going to be spread across sentence completion, which is testing vocabulary, and then passage-based reading, which will read a passage and then answer questions according to the passage. The 20-minute section of the critical reading will have 19 questions in all, again having sentence completions and passage-based reading. So that's the basic overall strategy, basic overall structure of the SAT. We'll get into the very specifics of each of the sections in different sessions. The other things that I think, generally speaking, about the SAT that a student wants to be aware of at this stage is, in preparing for the SAT, you are going through what I think of as three distinct stages. The first stage is just familiarizing yourself with the SAT as a whole. Understanding a little more specifically the various parts that I just described. It's very important that, because time is an issue on the SAT, it's very important that you have a strong understanding of how the test is broken up. You should be able to open up a given test and look at one question and know exactly what section that comes from. It's important to get an understanding of the time constraints in each section and be able to manage your time across the section. It's also important to understand all the instructions, because time is an issue, and the instructions are the one thing in the test that will not change from test to test. So it's important to understand those instructions so that you don't have to waste any time reading those instructions when you take the actual test. It's also important to understand some of the basics like order of difficulty, which I described, and then even just some of the logistical things. How does one fill in the grids on the student responses of the math section? Knowing how to fill in the bubbles. I think that might seem like a very basic thing, but it would kill you to study really hard and do very well in a test, but then the test doesn't even get graded. You will be filling in your answers on what's called a Scantron sheet, which is a bunch of little bubbles, and you fill it in with a pencil. Because they're going to grade these by just shoving them into a machine, it's important that your bubble is filled in properly. I've also found that students will have different strategies in terms of how they fill in the bubble. Some will answer a question, go and fill the bubble in. Others will answer maybe a page worth of questions, maybe 5 questions, and then go and fill all 5 of them in. Some will even do more than that. They'll answer all the questions on the question paper and then go back and fill the bubbles in. You have to find the strategy that works best for you, but do keep in mind that when you take the official test, when the time limit is up, they will tell you to put your pencils down. And they're very strict about that. They'll come and pull a pencil out of your hand if you don't. So it would be bad, to say the least, to have answered all the questions but not had enough time to fill in the answer sheet. So it's one thing you want to be careful about. Other basic logistical things about the SAT, and then we'll go into the broad strokes of preparing for the SAT, is that you don't want to rush yourself in answering any of the questions. Going back to how I started this, you have to keep in mind that the College Board did build a test to mess with your head. They built a test with 5 optional answers. Okay, in all the multiple choice questions, there will be 5 answers labeled A, B, C, D, and E. I have found that if we break down those 5 optional answers, there will be a right answer, and there will be probably 2 answers that you would easily be able to cross out. And then there are going to be two others that will be difficult to cross out. And one of those I call the tempting answer. That's the one that just feels like it's probably right. And it's in there for the SAT test taker that's pretty good, but not good enough to get the right answer. So you want to be careful about that. And I find that as you begin to prepare, even just getting to the point where you're down to the right answer and the tempting answer, which you'll know once you're analyzing the question that you got wrong, you go back and you say, I had it down to A and C, and A was the right answer. I was kind of back and forth between A and C. And if C was the tempting answer, which you'll get to identify over time, then that's good. That's good information for you. And eventually you'll start to see how to recognize the tempting answer. But back to general strategy number 1, don't rush yourself. Keep in mind that the College Board is very good at messing with your head. So if you feel like an answer is right, don't just jump into that answer without checking the other 4 options. This is particularly true in the multiple choice questions for the writing section. There are many times where an optional answer that you picked could be grammatically correct, but there would be a shorter grammatically correct answer, which is the one the College Board wants you to choose. You're starting to see how they're really jerks. Okay, I mentioned the strategy of learn all the directions first. No point in wasting time on the directions. If they're not going to change, then this is one area that we can quickly go through into answering the actual questions that you'll get points on. Okay. Quick note about guessing and negative marking. They do give you a penalty of minus 0.25 for every question that you get wrong, whether you guessed it or not. It's just their way of adjusting for guessing. So the question is always, if I'm not sure of an answer, should I guess and risk negative marking, or should I just leave it blank? It's a tricky one, but my general rule of thumb is if you can eliminate confidently 2 options, okay? A lot of the prep books say even if you can eliminate 1 option, it's worth a go. But I'd say if you can eliminate 2 options, it's always going to be worth guessing. Because if you can eliminate 2 options and you're down to 33.3% chance of guessing, those are pretty good odds. And if you don't answer the question, you miss the point completely. So even if you answered the question wrong, if in 4 more questions you guessed on another one right, well then you're already ahead of the game. Okay, so I think that if you can confidently, and that's the key there, confidently I know 2 of these options are definitely not the right answer, then I think it's a good time to guess. Now, how you guess is where you're going to have to get into an individual strategy, something that you develop for yourself. What I mean by that is that knowing that the College Board is messing with your head, if you're down to 3 optional answers, then you're going to be looking at your own logic to come up with that right answer. Now, knowing that they mess with your head, it's very likely that they will tempt you into the wrong answer out of those 3. So, not to be insulting, but a monkey could probably do it better, because a monkey's not going to be picking based on their own logic. They're just going to be like, eeny, meeny, miny, mo, boom, this is the one I want. This is something that, again, you need to develop with your own personal strategy, but I want you to keep it in mind that it might not be always the best to go with your gut. So we will utilize the specific strategies that I'm going to go over, but keep in mind that when you're analyzing your questions, you need to be careful about whether, when you are guessing, are you generally getting them right? Or do you need to tweak that strategy a little bit, the guessing strategy? So we'll talk about more about that when we get into the specific strategies. Another point is, I know that in Indian schools they are very strict about not writing in your textbooks, and I went to school in India. I remember almost physically still getting whacked in my hand for writing in my textbook. Bust that one out of your head, because you pay over $100 to take this test. Write everywhere, okay? It will, I think it's very helpful when you're going through a particular question. You want to eliminate answers that you're sure are not the right answer. You want to, in your passage-based reading, you want to be taking notes in the margins. You want to be underlining certain areas that you don't understand very well, or underlining areas where questions are going to come from. This test book should be marked backwards and forwards, right all over it. I also say that it's a good idea to, when you're going through a section, if you come to a question that you realize is going to take a little longer, well, all the questions are worth the same number of points. It would be wiser to come up with the strategy that would allow you to leave that question behind and come back to it if you have time, okay? And I actually advise that you might have a series of options for that. There might be, a D for difficult question, which I might not even answer. And then there might be a question mark that I put next to the question if I think I might be able to answer it, but it's going to take a little bit more time. That way you can go back and, through your own hierarchy, figure out which ones you're gonna hit first in case time is an issue. Right. So those are some of the main strategies that I wanted to go over, general strategies, and then I want to talk very quickly about your test prep stages. As I said, your first step is just to get general knowledge, to understand basically what the test is all about, the various sections, questions, time management within those. You should start your process, if you haven't already, because you're watching this, you might have. You should start your test prep process with taking a diagnostic test. That is, take a full-length SAT test in a timed environment. Don't give yourself any extra time. This will be the ugliest score that you have. But the idea is you create a base level foundation. This is where we started. And you'll use that as a diagnostic to understand where is the area that I need to focus on most. And there will likely be multiple areas. But I think this is really important. It's important to feel the success of doing better. So you have your baseline, and you know that from that baseline you're going to improve. I can tell you that just going over these general strategies, you will increase tremendously from that baseline test to the next time you take a test. And you will, in this first phase, have the greatest improvement because you're going to understand how the College Board messes with your head, and you're going to understand the basic questions and what they're looking for, and the trick of guessing intelligently when you don't know the answer. So you'll have a good amount of improvement here. Then you're going to reach a stage where the improvement kind of levels off, and you're kind of getting the same score or same number of questions wrong every time. In that stage, it's going to be critical for you to spend the maximum amount of time analyzing the questions that you get wrong. And as we proceed into these video tutorials, you'll see that that's where I'm going to focus my time as well, is going over the wrong answers and really understanding how the College Board came up with that right answer, and also understanding why the College Board would never choose the wrong answer that you chose. I can't stress this enough, and this is something that I know most students don't do on a regular basis. You know, when you get your test back in English or physics or whatever else in school, you look at the score that you got, you know, then probably the next thing you do is check out what everybody else around you got. You might even look at the questions that you got wrong, you know, just to see if the teacher made a mistake most of the time. But then that thing goes into your backpack and you're moving forward. You know, that's the past. I'm not going to think about it anymore. What you need to know about the SAT is that it's given 6 times a year. Every year. They don't really change the test that much. They don't reinvent the wheel 6 times a year. So they're going to change the words, they're going to change the numbers, but they're going to use the same strategies to mess with your head, and they're going to be testing that same root knowledge. So it's critical that when you get a question wrong, you focus on why you got it wrong, why the College Board would never choose that as the right answer, and then why their answer is correct, and how they disguise the right answer to not allow you to understand that that was the right answer. Okay? So analyzing your question is a critical component to stage 2 in your preparations. And you'll find that, you know, the initial reaction will be, I'd never have enough time to sit and analyze my questions like this when I'm doing the test. I agree. I don't disagree with you. That's absolutely true. You're in a timed environment. You got to move very quickly. 25 minutes is not a long time. Basically about a minute per question, even less in some of the sections. What I'm saying is that because when you're analyzing the questions, you do have the time. You're not in a timed environment. That's the time to belabor the question, to really understand why you got it wrong. And if you do that, I guarantee you that learning will become habitual. It'll be something that you just naturally do when you're doing the actual sections in the 25-minute timed environment. So you're using the time to analyze the wrong answers to develop a habit of doing this constantly. So I had one last point actually before we finish up the introduction. It is important to have a plan. I think a couple of the points that I'd like to make here are that I advise students when they are preparing for the official SAT that while it's very critical that you get to understand the strategies for each individual section, it's also very important to take full-length tests as you're proceeding through your preparation. The analogy I give is that you wouldn't sprint 50 yards every day to prepare for a marathon, nor can you do 25-minute sections of this test to prepare for a 3-hour and 45-minute test as you would do on the official day. So you need to structure whatever time you have, if it's 2 months, which is advisable, or less, that you've done at least 5 full-length tests. Many of my students do more than that, but 5 would be enough that we're going, and what this is going to do is it's going to give you two things. One is it's going to mentally prepare you for the long duration of the test, and two, if you average the scores out over those 5 tests, you'll have a pretty good indication of what your target score is, what you're likely to get in the real official test. So that's a real key area in terms of your preparation. I think that it's important to commit to that. With my students, I explain that they should let me know, and they can take the test with me, and we'll analyze the questions that they got wrong together. It's important to make a commitment to that, set up the dates that you're actually going to do the full-length tests. It's also important, I think, to set a specific score goal for yourself. When you take that baseline score, you know, it's not practical to expect that you'll just get an 800 in each section. You need to set a more realistic goal that you can work towards. I would suggest that you put a goal of about 25 to 35% improvement in each section. I think that that's a goal that's realistic, as well as leaves room for stretching yourself beyond that kind of improvement. As I said, I think you should set up the specific dates that you would do the full-length test over whatever period of time you have. You want to give yourself some time in between those full-length tests so that you can improve on the areas that you're still having difficulty on, and then you'll be able to see that improvement through the results of the full-length practice test that you've done. The in-between part, in between those full-length practice tests, that also you should block out time. Know that this is going to be my time to prepare for SAT. It's very important that you psychologically set that goal for yourself, that this is my SAT time. And the best SAT results, students with best results that I've seen, have put their social life on hold for that period of time. It might be important for you to evaluate what's going on in your life right now that you might need to put on hold for some period of time to prepare for the SAT. Whether that's an hour less of Facebook a week or a day, or television or whatever else, you need to give up something in order to make room for this SAT prep time. When you're taking those practice tests, treat them like the real thing. Treat it like you're actually at the test site taking an official test. Do it in the timed environment. Don't give yourself more time. Don't not write the essay. That's one a lot of students like to do. Don't do the sections out of order. Do them in order. You're basically preparing yourself for the actual environment that you're going to be taking the official test. So bring it to as close to that environment as possible. Another note on test prep materials. I really feel like most of the prep books, Princeton Review, Kaplan, Thompson's, Gruber's, they all talk about the same kind of strategies. So I'm not really concerned about which ones of those you use in terms of learning the strategies. And in fact, we're going to talk about those similar strategies in these video tutorials. But when you're taking the full-length tests, and I think even when you're taking the practice tests, it would be better to use the College Board's official guide to the SAT. That's the Blue Book. At least it's currently a Blue Book and has been for the past 10 years. Because the College Board are the official sponsors of the SAT, and they are the closest to writing the most similar, if not exactly, because a lot of the tests that you get in that book are actual SATs that have been given before. And I found that in other prep books, the material, first of all, they're emulating what they think the College Board would write. And second of all, I find that sometimes the answers are wrong. So I think that using the College Board's either 10 Real SATs book or the official guide to the SAT or the official online program that they have are the best in terms of your practice tests. All right, I think we'll end it from